Good afternoon, I'm Katie Wilson and you're watching Context. US President Donald Trump's tour of the Gulf has begun, marking his first major diplomatic trip of his second term. Across 4 days, he'll visit the states of Saudi Arabia, Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. Trump has already met with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, and a lavish state dinner is planned for later in Riyadh. A key focus of the trip will be securing significant new investment for the US economy. An agreement for Saudi Arabia to buy more than $100 billion of US arms and other military equipment is widely reported to be among the deals that Trump is due to announce on this trip. President Trump also made Saudi Arabia the first major visit of his first term, which continues to break with the tradition of US presidents visiting the UK, Canada or Mexico first. Trump's itinerary notably does not include Israel, but analysts say that economic issues, rather than diplomatic ones or security concerns, are at the top of Trump's priority list. Joining me now to discuss what we can expect from this trip and its potential global impact is geopolitical analyst Anna Evans. Thanks for joining us, Anna. Now,
hello, Katie.
Hi. Now, as I mentioned earlier, a US president choosing to visit Saudi Arabia first is a break with tradition. What could be the thinking behind this?
Well, Katie, I think it is very clear that President Trump wants to invest quite a lot in the continuity of security understandings with the Arab Gulf states. This visit shows, first of all, that Israel is not included, is not at the front line of the first state visit by the US administration's leader. And it shows that this US administration is very much concerned with financial and trade and security agreements with the Arab Gulf states. This is, of course, in my view as an analyst, a very clear consequence of President Trump's preoccupation with China. So, for example, today, the New York Times has published an essay, an article, where it actually criticizes President Trump's concern with a lot of financial deals with the Arab Gulf states. And this criticism is a result of the possible ethical issues that arise from the fact that President Trump's family has major real estate deals and interests, and there is a promise for a Saudi Arabian billion investment in the United States.
So what do you think both parties
correct.
are looking to gain from this meeting?
Well, it seems that while it is correct that a lot of trade issues are being addressed here, it seems very clear that both parties will gain from strengthening their security alliances and the current terms of trade in a context where China is trying to dominate politics and diplomatic spheres and financial investment also in the Middle East. So, for example, Saudi Arabia sells a lot of oil to China, but it buys a lot of defense and security equipments from the United States. So it is in the interest of the United States to sponsor these agreements and not allow China to take too much of a foothold in the region via its trade policy. And so both parties have...
Yeah, you mentioned these arms deals and the buy-in of defence and weapons. What could this, between the US and Saudi Arabia, what could that mean for Yemen?
Well, this is very important for two reasons. So the arms deals between the US and Saudi Arabia manifest a continuity of US foreign policy in terms of being the major security supplier to Saudi Arabia and Arab Gulf states. And we know that Saudi Arabia has always played a critical role in deterring the Houthis' presence and domination of areas of Yemen, which have, as we know, played a major risk to maritime transit via the Red Sea. And it has decreased, the attacks by the Houthis have decreased maritime transit via the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. And the United States, as we know, has been primarily concerned with this. And Saudi Arabia also has played a role in supporting against the Houthis. As we know, recently the United States and the Houthis have declared that these attacks to maritime transit are, going to be suspended by the Houthis. But still, Saudi Arabia plays a big role here. But there is a very, very high level concern also with Iran's nuclear capacity. And this is where we see a major U-turn in America's policy versus previous American policy, especially the one that President Trump carried out in his first mandate. Because as we know, President Trump left the nuclear agreement during his first mandate. And now the Trump's administration has resumed negotiations towards an agreement with Iran. So
this
4 rounds of negotiations have
pick up on with you, Anna, and talk about a bit more. What do you think the wider implications of this visit could be as far as these talks between the US and Iran are concerned?
Well, at least 4 rounds have been now completed, 4 rounds of talks, and this is a lot. It means that there is real progression with regard to these negotiations with Iran. So it is very important for Saudi Arabia that the United States keeps supplying the equipment that Saudi Arabia needs for its nuclear enrichment project. And also, it is very important that the United States provides all the necessary safeguards in terms of security for the Gulf states. So, for example, I, as an analyst, do not agree that this trip is only a business trip. On the contrary, I think this is a really important trip because it provides, number one, a counter move to China's increasing presence in the Gulf. It provides security guarantees to the Arab Gulf countries in the face of the serious negotiations that are going on with Iran. And also, it shows that the United States is not willing at this stage to allow Israel to directly confront Iran in terms of its nuclear capacities. So we know that when Israel attacked or the Israeli planes flew over Iran a few months ago.
How about we turn our attention to Israel a bit more? That's something that's been coming up, isn't it? So this Israel, it notably isn't on Trump's agenda this time. What can we make of this?
Precisely in the line of what I was saying, the absence of Israel in this trip and very notable absence of any presence or any dialogues with Israel in this trip shows that the United States is not willing to allow Israel at this point to directly attack Iran's nuclear facilities, which was one possibility on the table to decrease Hamas resilient play in Gaza, because as we know, Iran has a major role in helping Hamas. So one of the options on Israel's table was to threaten and carry out an attack that would prevent Iran from further developing its nuclear capabilities. But the absence of Israel at this stage and Trump's visit to the Arab Gulf countries and the ongoing negotiations with Iran show that President Trump is not willing at this stage to support Israel or to greenlight any sort of attack against Iran. So I think this is a very important and probably not sufficiently stated strategic vision related to this trip. So it is.
What do you think it says about American priorities in the region now? Because Israel's been America's longtime ally.
Well, it says that, again, this administration's priority is without any doubt China. So what President Trump is doing is a strategy that allows the United States to safeguard its position in the Middle East and to decouple the Middle East from China. I think this is a very clear objective, because we know that Iran, both Iran and the Arab Gulf countries are suppliers of fossil fuels to China. China, in turn, is the avid major consumer of fossil fuels in the world. And so both Iran and Arab Gulf states have very high stakes in terms of maintaining trade with China. And what President Trump is doing is investing on both Iranian rapprochement and its continuity of investments with the Arab Gulf states in terms of security, different sorts of security, so nuclear, arms, planes, etc., that the US supplies to the Arab Gulf states. And in doing so, in investing on these two lines, Iran and the Gulf Arab states, the US is trying to deter China's presence in the Middle East. So yes, there is a change, because Israel might not be at this stage the first priority if one considers that China is actually the first priority.
So let's stick with China, and this visit has come as there's a trade war between the US and China, and Trump's new import tariffs have significantly disrupted global trade. What could this visit mean for China, but internally as well? Could this just be about approval ratings following these tariffs?
Well, Katie, President Trump and President Xi Jinping, they have announced a suspension of 90 days on the tariff war. And this is, again, major news. We know that domestically, President Trump was facing great pressure from a number of sides. So, for example, great pressure from Congress people who are Republicans and who represent electorate constituencies that were in risk with these tariffs because of the high prices that actually were detrimental to industrial revival, on the one hand. Then the billionaires and the pensioners who had their investment funds, going on turbulence because of, the uncertainty related to the tariffs. And more recently, the big retailers like Target, Walmart, that threatened well, not threatened, but they alerted the administration that soon there would be empty shelves in the US without products because of the tariffs, because of the high prices that these retailers could not sustain. And so this would very soon lead to consumer protest.
What do you think this visit? What do you think this visit could show to the American public? Could it be a signal that his America First agenda is delivering results despite what's been said at home?
Yes, indeed. So President Trump will show that he brings pledges of billions of dollars investment from Saudi Arabia. I think it is 600 billion pledged in future investment from Saudi Arabia. Even if that investment does not materialize, it will be really important to show at home, look, I did this first trip and I am bringing trillions of dollars in foreign investment to the US, in the US. This is really a major game considering the preoccupations of the electoral constituencies that I mentioned with regard to the war tariff. So on the one hand, the suspension of tariffs. On the other hand, the statement that billions or trillions of dollars will be flowing into the US in foreign investment, direct foreign investment, this is really important to appease the constituencies and the electorate with regard to the uncertainties and the problems and the criticisms that have been very intense versus the tariff war policy. So this is indeed a very important moment, not only to safeguard American interest in the Middle East, but also to safeguard the Republican Party's position internally, because there will be midterm elections, and the fact that the administration has been losing popularity as a result of the tariff war, this has been a big problem for all the Congress people who will have to face the midterm elections. And so
looking ahead to the visit, one thing that is going to be celebrated there is the Abraham Accords, so that's the normalisation of relations between Israel, the UAE and Bahrain. Now, that will be celebrated when Trump visits Abu Dhabi later this week, but that's not on the agenda this time, is it, between these countries that Trump will be visiting?
Yes, I think, Katie, that this is the difference between the current administration and previous administrations. So in previous administrations, there was a very clear goal to manifest great political agreements and diplomatic achievements with regard to the situation in the Middle East. You know, either agreements between, say, Israel and Arab countries, i.e. the Abraham Accords, or, for example, the counter-terrorism initiatives that relied on cooperation with Arab countries, or attempted peace agreements that involve the Palestinian cause. However, because there is this continuing war in Gaza and Israel has resumed its war activities, it would be nearly impossible at this stage to reach further agreements involving the Palestinian cause or involving further normalization. because no Arab leader will want to have this on its shoulders at a stage when Israel has resumed attacks in Gaza. So politically, this is unsustainable in terms of normalization agreements. And so again, I think that this trip is targeted, as you said, Katie, on the one hand, to the domestic audience, to show the domestic audience that President Trump is bringing trillions of dollars in investments, and on the other hand, to China, to show that the country is still positioned with very, very massive presence, military security and trade presence in the Middle East. So this is a trip that safeguards our Gulf countries versus the Iranian nuclear threat, and that safeguards the US position in the Middle East with regard to China. It is not a trip about Israel or about normalization or about diplomatic accords. So on that, it is indeed a different foreign policy strategy model.
It's certainly one to watch, isn't it, Anna? Thank you so much for your insights, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Katie.
Well, as President Trump's visit gets underway, he had spoken of an earth-shattering announcement during this visit. It's still not clear what he was referring to. It could point to the mega deals that he's expected to sign on his 3 stops, totaling more than $1 trillion in investment in the US economy. AnewZ will keep bringing you the latest. That's all we have for now.